People of Ghana, there is not one single worker who could make ends meet, and the miracle is that the people have been able to endure this for so long.
As tributes pour in for Ghana's longest-serving head of state, we explore the impact of his contribution to Ghana's development.
That history on balance will be kind to him and will render a positive verdict on his contribution to the evolution of our nation and the entrenchment of its democratic institutions and culture.
And top stories brought to you by Balako Mineral Water, Vodafone, the features Exciting Ready, and Gasam Cement, the nation builder. My name is Ernest Mena. Tonight, it's a nation in grief over the loss of an iconic political figure. Flight Lieutenant Jerry John Rawlings, who died at the Kolebu Teaching Hospital after a short illness, was laid to rest at the military cemetery at the Burma camp, climaxing 4 days of activities in honor of the former president. Today, tributes have been pouring in for the man we all know as JJ. President Akufo-Addo said history will be kind to him and render a positive verdict on his contribution. We'll explore that shortly, but first, here's an excerpt of a documentary set for broadcast later tonight on the Joy News channel.
Jerry John Rawlings, a man of many faces, charismatic, enigmatic, and maybe the man who, through courage and love for his nation, ended an era of coup d'etats in Ghana.
December 31st was the last coup d'etat that we had in Ghana. I want to give him the credit for ending coup d'etats, because it became fashionable in our sub-region where one person, one country overthrows and then the next day you hear it in a different country. Military adventurism by some of the people in the profession. And that, I would say, it was something that had to end because the country was going down. People were migrating. People couldn't cope with the hardships of the times. So for that, he should take some credit for ending all coup d'etats for the good of our country.
Born on the 22nd of June, 1947, in Accra, Ghana, to Victoria Agbutui and his Scottish father, James Ramsey, Rawlings attended Achimota School and a military academy at Teshi. Rawlings was married to Nana Konadu Ajiman.
I remember him more as a young adult. When I really got to know him, he was over 10. But then his character formation had reached a very advanced level. He was very self-assured. He was very much dependent on himself. And he was always after knowledge. He was a very friendly person and willing to help others.
Morning, Nani, about 5 o'clock.
I met Rawlings at the age of 14 when he came to my grandfather, and at a point took my grandfather as his father. Openly, at 6 March parade, or 31st anniversary parade at the Independence Square, you could walk from his mic when he's giving a speech and he's trying to narrate a story on an issue. He would leave the mic, walk towards my grandfather, hold his hand and then lift him up. But this is my father. And then after that, he would tell the story behind it, why he's taking him as his father.
He was hands-on leader. And he knew what it was about. He had a purpose. If you know what it says, I didn't know what it was about. The one doesn't know the man. And he encourages people. When, whatever you put your hands on, when you dream about something and you want to try it and you want to tell him, he also play it around and give you his own, perception about how it should be.
But the point is that we have set the example. We have shown that we're capable of doing it.
I was afraid of Mr. Rawlings. It's one of the painful, caps we have to carry all along. When we go out, then people will say, hey, you are afraid, you people, you're afraid of Mr. Rawlings. He was beating and slapping people, and so then I don't probably wouldn't have any cheek. You got me. That's a kind of thing. But he wanted me to treat him as a colleague. He called me Minia. How can I be afraid of Minia, as it were? And but we showed great deference to him on account of the fact that he was the leader. I don't want to go too much. I'm saying that when the two of us are in the room and we're having a chat, or in general doing work, we are at a certain level. But once a third person comes in, I pull attention, yes sir, yes sir, yes sir, yes sir. You see, for the third person, it's a yes sir relationship with him. But here.
So that's an excerpt of a Ghana's Great documentary set for broadcast in a few minutes. That's at 6 p.m. on the Joy News channel. Also be live on our social media platforms. But at the state funeral today, tributes poured in for the former president from family to party and the state. They gave some personal insight and also his contribution to nation building at various levels. President Akufo-Addo acknowledged his role in the founding of the Fourth Republic.
He gave at his trial an important insight into his character when he stood up before the military tribunal to accept sole responsibility for the attempt and to request the NCOs who were being tried with him to be absolved and freed by the tribunal. The great events that were to define his character and career followed quickly after his trial, conviction, and sentence. 3 weeks later, whilst awaiting execution of his sentence, he was dramatically freed from prison by the insurgents of what has come to be known as the June 4th uprising, when junior officers and other ranks of the Ghana Armed Forces banded together to throw out the Supreme Military Council and install the Armed Forces Revolutionary Council, AFRC, headed by Flight Lieutenant Jerry John Rawlings. Thereafter, JJ to all and sundry in Ghana. It is no wonder that he came to regard June 4th as, quote, that defined day, unquote. It is for good reason that his well-known oft-cited ideals of probity and accountability, in which he invested a great deal of his political capital, have been enshrined in the Constitution of the Fourth Republic, and together with freedom and justice, the words of our nation's motto, constitute the foundational principles on which social order is to be developed in Ghana. There are many who acknowledge him as the founder of the Fourth Republic, a republic which has proved to be the most enduring and stable in our history, and which has witnessed 8 successive elections, 3 peaceful changes of government from one party to another, and 5 presidents. For all his revolutionary antecedents, he set in 2001 the enviable precedent which has since guided our country of respecting the 2-term limit of the presidency and superintending the orderly transfer of power to his democratically elected successor.
And so from military rule to democratic governance, the president's verdict is that history will be kind to the memory of Jerry John Rawlings.
It was no secret that the relation that existed between the two of us, right? I called him Comandante because of his admiration for the famous Latin American revolutionaries, Fidel Castro, Hugo Chavez, and Daniel Ortega, a nickname which seemed to please him. I believe that history on balance will be kind to him and will render a positive verdict on his contribution to the evolution of our nation and the entrenchment of its democratic institutions and culture. It is entirely appropriate and fitting that he should receive a state funeral with full honors to express the gratitude of the nation for that contribution. My wife Rebecca and our children join me in expressing our sincere, heartfelt condolence to his beloved wife, Nana Konedu, his children, Ezanato, Yasantua, Amina, and Kimathi, and his entire family for their great loss of one of the outstanding figures of modern Ghanaian history, a man whose sense of humor was truly infectious.
That's President Akufo-Addo there. My colleague Elton Brobe joins me in the studio with more on the tribute. Elton, you've spent the entire day at the Black Star Square where the state funeral was held, and the planning committee produced a booklet, a very huge one with lots of tributes in there.
Right.
Of course, many of them could not be read at the state funeral because of time, but in there was the tribute of former President John Agyekum Kufuor. And what was his comment about the legacy of J.J. Rawlings?
So the booklet is 296 pages.
296
pages. And we have tributes from even Queen Elizabeth of the United Kingdom, Prince Charles, sitting and former presidents, South Africa, Thabo Mbeki.
All around the world.
All around the world. Now, for you asked about former President John Kufuor. He was there in person to witness the burial service of his of late President Rawlings. His is captured on page 18 of this booklet, and it says that my wife Theresa and I are deeply saddened by the passing of former President Jerry Rawlings, whose ultimately death came as a thunderbolt to us and our children. President Rawlings was the longest serving head of state since our nation's independence in 1957, and even though it wasn't always that he and I agreed on many matters of state, I felt that he was trying to do the best he knew he could under his peculiar circumstances. When the time came for him to step down as president on 7 January 2001, he obliged and obviously tried to contain whatever reservation he had about me and my government that succeeded him and his government within the bounds of the National Constitution of 1992. He says, in this regard, whatever doubts persisted about his commitment to democratic rule became attenuated and earned him a legacy of contributing to the sustenance of democratic governance of our country till his demise. History will give him a balanced place in the annals of our nation. He says, we are left now to mourn him and also express our heartfelt condolences to the widow, Mrs. Nana Konedu Agyeman-Rawlings, their children, and the larger family.
And so that tribute essentially focused on the governance aspect of the legacy of former President Rawlings. Now, there's also the tribute of former President John Mahama. What did he say about the legacy of the late former president?
Well, he says that your signature promulgating the 1992 Constitution gave birth to the most enduring democratic republic Ghana has experienced in the entire historical existence. Ghana has you to thank for this. He says the decentralized local government system based on the district assembly concept is also a lasting legacy of your stewardship in Ghana's political space. Your contribution to the African success story in collaboration with other progressive African leaders culminated in ending apartheid in South Africa and the swearing in of Nelson Mandela as its first black president. Your penchant for saying, as it is without regard for political sensibilities, earn you the moniker Mr. Boom. He says, a proud son of the voter when you gave Ghana another chance and a new breath of life under the Fourth Republican Constitution. He says, boss, you may be gone, but your memory will continue to inspire countless generations of Ghanaians to challenge the status quo and use their non-conformism to spur societal progress. You were and remain the soldier of a lifelong and relentless quest for freedom and justice. And yeah, so this is coming from former President John Mahama, who was the NDC candidate in the 2020 general elections.
Thank you very much, Elton, for bringing us those details in that brochure there, produced by the funeral committee. Let's go to the phone lines now. So many of the tributes focused on the political aspect of the legacy of Jerry John Rawlings. Now, there's also the economic aspect, and we'll be analyzing that as well. Let's go on to the phone lines now and speak to Dr. Ebu Texon. He's an economist. He joins us. Thank you very much, sir, for your time here on Top Story. Now, once you mention Jerry John Rawlings, as far as economics is concerned, the Economic Recovery Program comes to mind. What will be your assessment of that program and how it contributed to stabilizing the economy at the time?
Okay, thank you. Good evening to your listeners. I'm sorry my voice is a little bit coming out too clear, but I hope they will put up with it. Yeah, the reforms that Ghana went through in the early part of the 1980s, right up to almost the middle part of the 1990s, was an economic reform package that we actually subscribed to from the World Bank and the IMF. And the reforms were intended to get Ghana's economy back on track, but it was in two parts. One, to stabilize the economy, and then to reform. So there was an economic stabilization and then an economic reforms. That was intended to get Ghana back to where it was before the early 1970s. You remember, by the end of the 1970s, the Ghana economy was not doing too well. Inflation had hit over 100%. And so there were issues with shortages of essential food items and fuel and all of that. And when Dr. Liman came to power, the economy should have gone under some reforms, but it delayed a bit until 1983, when Ghana was forced to go to the Bretton Woods institutions to seek their support, and we had to go through those reforms. Over the years, up until the 1990s, when we moved into the democratic dispensation, Ghana did well. In fact, Ghana and Uganda are the poster boys of the World Bank when it comes to the reform packages that they brought to Africa. Ghana did so well. Ghana showed some positive, outcomes from the reforms. It came at a cost anyway. We had to build an economy that was now going to be depending on the private sector rather than state-led. And so remember, as part of the reforms, there was massive sale of state-owned enterprises because Ghana's fiscal deficit was too huge, and the fiscal deficit were coming from the fact that the state was supporting enterprises that were not doing well. And therefore, one of the main reform packages was for Ghana to move from state-led economic activities to private sector-led. And that was why we sold most of our state-owned enterprises. Apart from that, there are also banking reforms, financial sector reforms, and trade liberalization. That also came at a cost. But by the beginning of the 1990s, getting to the end of the 1990s, Ghana's economy had become relatively stable. And with democracy, we've seen what we've been able to do up to now. So in terms of Rawlings' regime from 1981, let's say 82 to 2000, Ghana went through a lot of reforms, and luckily for us, we were able to come out as one of the best performing in Africa, even though it came with some negative impacts.
And so you agree with those who say that regime, that program, was a period of rebirth or a turnaround for Ghana's economy?
Sure,
at the time?
That's what it did. We had to make sure that we build the economic infrastructure. We have to make sure that we were now going to take away all the distortions that were making it very difficult for economy to stabilize, to grow. Even at that time, there were interest rate controls. Almost everything was under price control. And that was not efficient enough. And therefore, there was a need for us to reform all our markets so that we begin to see some reforms in terms of job creation, letting the private sector lead. So that period of regime was the breakaway from state-led to private sector-led that we have now. And that was very critical. It was a point in time where we went through some difficulties, but the basic infrastructure and all of that was put in place for us to get to where we are now.
You talk about the privatization of the economy at the time, and which led to the sale of some of state enterprises. There are some who say that was a negative move that adversely affected us and took us off the path of, absolute recovery and economic independence.
No, that is all right. I mean, no country in the world. I mean, if we take the East Asian tigers, who their development paths and their reforms have become a classic case study for development economics. They did not, even though the state was involved, the state was not involved in direct production. And Nkrumah, when he set up Ghana, wanted to go the way by state-owned enterprises. But most of our state-owned enterprises were totally inefficient. I mean, a classic example was the reforms that we did to communication in this country, when we allowed MTN to come in. And what we find now is as a result of those reforms. So I do not agree that moving away into the private sector-led reforms was the wrong move to do. The state had no business into going into direct production. What a state normally has to do is provide the environment for the private sector to thrive, support the environment for the private sector to generate jobs and produce outputs. Now, we have state-owned enterprises that were managed inefficiently. They were carrying a lot of costs on government to pay that. And that was the reason why we carried huge fiscal deficits. And so I find it very strange if people think that a breakaway from the state-owned enterprises to the private sector-led was wrong. I mean, definitely it came with some challenges. I mean, people lost their jobs. A private sector will only employ up to a point where they are efficient. But in most state enterprises, what do? We pack them with people just to pay them salaries, productivity is low, and all of that. So no country has done any serious transformation by relying solely on the states to drive the economic process forward. It doesn't happen anywhere. It has to be led by the state, but the private sector should lead economic activities in the economy. And that's exactly what we did under the reforms. The package itself came with some problems because if you look at the content of the reforms that we went through, some of the policy prescriptions were alien to the African sub-region. And so the costs that came out of those reforms were costs that were totally unnecessary. If we had tweaked some of the reform packages to our local context. And that is what the IMF learned after over 2 decades in Africa and other developing parts of the world, that there was a need for them to tweak their reform packages to the local circumstances of countries. And so, yes, there were problems with it, but I don't think that it was wrong. The state has no role to play in direct production.
There was also the structural adjustment program, and there are those who believe that instead of strengthening our position then as a country, it brought some hardship, especially to those in the urban areas, and that did not complement the agenda to privatize the economy and have a liberal system.
Yeah, I mean the initial structural adjustment program came with some huge cost. I mean, what you just said is true. That was one of the negative aspects of the structural adjustment program. But what the economic reforms was supposed to do just afterwards was to now get the Ghanaian economy to begin to become an economy that was going to be self-sustaining. And so all the sort of policies that were being pursued initially was meant, one, to mitigate some of the cost of the adjustment, and then to build the economic infrastructure for Ghana to begin to build its own economy that we have now. So there's no doubt that the initial structural adjustment program came with huge costs. And so we needed, if upon hindsight, if we go back, or we have to go back, we would have tweaked some of the things that we did under the structural adjustment program. But that's not what happened. What is important is that afterwards, we set out an economic reform package that we went through that has brought Ghana to the present circumstances where Ghana is. There were times when even importing needed inputs for production was a big deal. There were no foreign currency for importers to really import them. When we liberalized our foreign exchange market, yes, we noticed that it had some cost on the economy. But the most important thing was that it allowed the economy to become attractive for foreign direct investments, for us to generate the jobs and produce output that was going to let the Ghanaian economy grow. So over the 2 decades that this happened up to the beginning of the 2000s, I can say confidently that the reform package that Ghana went through under Rawlings from 1981 or 83 to what we had after 2000 with all these challenges was something that Ghana had done better than most countries in Africa. Even though some will say African is not a region to compare with.
Very well.
But indeed, in the most of the developing countries, Ghana was one of the poster countries of the Bretton Woods institutions. It's because we went through reforms, we did a lot, we achieved a lot, but nobody is saying that there were no costs attached to that.
Very well. Thank you very much.
But for what was put at that time, our Ghanaian economy that we are so proud of when we talk about the Ghanaian economy and stability and all of that, was built on the reforms that we did during that time. So,
very well. Very well. Thank you very much, Dr. Ebu Texin, for your time here on Top Story. There's also the political aspect, and we're fortunate to be joined by Dr. Kwesi Amakye, a senior lecturer at the KNUST. Doc, thank you very much for joining us here on Top Story. Now, he has been, credited for the establishment or for the founding of the Fourth Republic. Has that been overemphasized in your estimation?
I don't know whether it's my piece. Your voice is very, very low.
Hello, Dr. Amakye, can you hear me?
Yes, it's quite faint. I can hear you all right.
If it's better now, we're talking about the legacy of Rawlings as far as the governance and democracy of this country is concerned. There are people like Charles Rekuburobe who believe that he was a reluctant Democrat and he has issues with the crediting of the founding of the Fourth Republic to him.
It's an interesting thing simply because of the fact that Jerry Rawlings had his own ideas about democracy, his understanding of how democracy should work in Ghana. Definitely, he had issues with the liberal democracy. He didn't hide it. Eventually, he gave in because, according to him, majority of Ghanaians wanted it. And so he came with it. Now, that politically is brilliance, flexibility, and then, the ability to also work with the people you work with. Leaders and followers should be able to influence one another to make progress, to make success. But actually, looking at his legacy for the Fourth Republic, I think the crucial thing is what the other contributor was making. It all came together to establish the current stability that we have. The structural adjustment program that Jerry Rawlings led. Until then, any government that went to the IMF and implemented a structural adjustment program invited the military and got booted out of government. For the first time, the PNDC went through it and established such a strong state that Ghana, although was going through SAP with its negative effects, some of the costs that Ghanaians had to bear, the challenges that go with it, retrenchment, and then government in a way withdrawing from society. Ghana didn't have to go through what has been captured in the literature as political landmines the way other countries do. So when Ghana virtually was able to do that, it made it possible for the politics of Ghana to also come to terms with the reality so that people in the political divide could not hide behind the hardships that go with the implementation of structural adjustment program
like we had it.
So
because of time,
our politics stabilized, and now Ghana is making the progress it's making. So definitely, he's to be credited with the success story of Ghana's Fourth Republic.
Dr. Amachi, thank you very much for speaking to us here on Top Story. And that's Top Story brought to you by Balakwa Mineral Water, Gasam Cement, the Nation Builder, and Vodafone. The future is exciting. Ready? Newsnight begins right now.
55, 78, 58, 70. Hey, Charlie. My network is really killing me. I have to pay my uncle's workers via mobile money, but the charges alone, it's about 380 cedis.
Hey, charges alone just to send money? That's $10 of cement already, my guy.